Rock and roll has made good use of this snare drum, and the tom-toms and those timbales I was playing. A lot of the modern drum sounds that we're now hearing on the radio come from a snare drum, but they don't sound like this. Now listen to this. That's this drum recorded in a studio. I'm going to tell you a story about what's happened to it.
I said, hey, yo, what do you know? Took my drum to the studio, plugged it in, turned it on, soon I found that the sound of my drum was gone. New sounds all around, pounding through the air, crashing, flashing, machines everywhere. Man in the corner said, don't you fear, what you need, don't you know, is an engineer. Tell me what you did to this drum of mine. Sounds so strange. All the sounds I've always heard have all been changed. He said, I took your drum, stretched it out, took it all apart, turned it inside out, played it backwards, upside down. Gonna give you back again a brand new sound. Sound, 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 new sound, 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 sound. It's a blast. Drum. Jump down, turn around, listen to me as I play my drum with technology. It's intensified, electrified, delayed.
Hi, my name's Bill. I'm a drummer. And this is what a lot of people think of when they think of a drum. It's a snare drum, and for centuries, it's been used to inspire people. Many different military cultures have used this drum to inspire young people to march off to war and fight. Other people have used it to inspire young people to get up onto the floor and dance. Dance to the beat of a very different drummer. They gave it my name. How the years go by, the beats the same. Hey!
doing it with love. Love, 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 love.
So that's what happened to the snare drum. And like most everything else this century, it has fallen into the hands of technology. And it's a lot of fun. It's technology that gave us the electric guitar, and the electric guitar gave us rock and roll. That was only about 35 years ago. When I was little, rock and roll hadn't even been born. I used to listen to jazz. And jazz was born about 85 years ago in the city of New Orleans, in the state of Louisiana, on the mouth of the Mississippi River. They say that when the people there started playing the trumpets, trombones, and clarinets that they'd heard in the European marches, a lot of things changed. They started to play their own songs, their blues and spirituals, and they mixed them together with their own African rhythms, and jazz was born. There's a sound that technology hasn't changed. Those are mockingbirds. I made this recording of them when I was in New Orleans. I was sitting on the front porch of a house that faced onto the street in the heart of the Vieux Carré, the old part of the city, sipping a cool drink. It was a beautiful night. I became aware of this incredible music. It was slow jazz, but I recognized the tune as an old hymn, Just a Closer Walk with Thee. And it was getting louder. It was coming right down the street. Then, around the corner came a marching band, carrying a banner that said Olympia Brass Band. Behind that were 6 men carrying a coffin. Behind that, an entire church congregation. It was a funeral procession. I was so moved by what I heard and saw that I followed them to the graveside. They set the coffin down and the preacher stepped forward. He spoke of the woman they were burying, who'd meant so much to those who loved her. Her mother and father had been slaves, and she too had lived a hard life full of labor and suffering. She had many grandchildren, all of whom have had an equal opportunity to live rich and decent lives. And then he said something that surprised me. He said, "Now the time of grieving is over. As we leave this graveside, let us go in celebration. Because of her deep faith, her death is not the end to her life, but the most glorious part of it. For now, at this very moment, she is alive and resting in the arms of God." trombones, trumpets, and clarinets that we just heard playing in the New Orleans Marching Band all come from a European orchestral tradition that features a kind of music that we usually call classical music. And in those same European orchestras, we would also find the string instruments like the violin and cello. And the same way that the people of New Orleans used those horns to play jazz with, we know that it was people traveling back from Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries that brought the violin to Ireland. It became better known as the fiddle, and it was soon incorporated into Irish culture and musical traditions. The years 1845 to 1848 were years of horrible famine in Ireland. Thousands of people fled the country, many coming to North America. Where I come from in Ontario, Canada, the Irish settled in places with names like Bancroft, Killaloe, and Barry's Bay, and the only thing that the land seemed capable of growing was rocks. But the Irish seemed to be able to grow things right out of rocks. But it was hard work, day after day, year after year, and by our standards, they had very little. They had no electricity in their homes, no radios, televisions, or phones, but they did have one thing that they had brought with them from Ireland that brought them endless hours of delight: their music. At night, after supper, in hundreds of small farmhouses across Ontario, somebody would be asked to pull down the fiddle, rosin up the bow, and play us a tune. And if the spirit so moved, Mother might even clog out a reel on the floor over by the wood stove. Then again, sometimes Ma was a bit shy, but the fiddlers loved to play their fiddles with the rhythm that the dancing created, so they often wouldn't give Ma any peace until she put down her apron and came out onto the floor. When I was a kid, I used to have this walk to school up a long hill. In the wintertime, with the wind whipping up all the snow, I used to pull the hood tight over my head and bury my face into my scarf. It was like my own world inside there, and I'd start to sing along in time with my walking beat. By the time I got to class, I'd still have this song running around my head, and I'd be tapping away on my desk or on my math set. And I was constantly being told to please stop that horrible noise. And not just by my teachers. I used to drive my parents crazy. Can you imagine having a son who discovers one day that if you take the garbage can, dump the garbage out onto the floor, and tip the can upside down, it makes a great sound?
shooting bubbles at up, ow.
Now that I'm a big guy, an adult, I have 2 small sons. This past summer, when the youngest, Jesse, was just a baby, I'd put him in the snuggly pack on my chest, and in order to get him to fall asleep, I'd take him for long walks, and I started to make up songs again. Malakeayo, Malakeayo, picking up strange words out of the air as if it was my own language. Finally, Jesse would fall asleep, and I'd go back to the house to lay him down in his bed. I'd get to the porch, open the door, and... Shh, Zach, please be quiet. You're driving me crazy. My 4-year-old son, Zach, would be playing the drums. There were a lot of sleepless nights and long walks with the baby in a snuggly. And every now and then I'd make up a song that was good enough to bring to the studio and play with other musicians and put it on a record. I'm what you call a percussionist. I love to play drums, but I play a lot of other things too. Shh. I had a great teacher. I still do. The radio. Do you realize that right now there are thousands upon thousands of waves traveling through our bodies? Every wave that this radio can pick up, every station, is inside each one of us. And there are a lot of other waves in here and in us that this radio can't pick up. CB, short waves, police cars, taxis, television waves, satellites, much music. They're all here. And if you have the right equipment, you can pick up any of those waves. The difficult thing is deciding what to tune into. When people asked me as a kid what instrument I played, I told them I played the radio. And I did. Every night, just as long as I could stay awake. But I didn't just listen to one station. I used to travel around a lot. Stormy nights were great. Because the clouds were so low in the sky, I could pick up AM stations from towns and cities that were way down in the States or out in the prairies somewhere. Some played country music, classical, jazz, rock and roll. And on the shortwave, I could get stations from overseas, Europe, and parts of South America, and on good nights, North Africa. I heard announcers with different accents or who spoke different languages, and they played music that was very different from what I usually heard. It was great, tuning in to different waves. So I didn't just stick with just the snare drum. I learned how to play a lot of different things. Some of the most joyful music comes from people who are experiencing the most hardship. And it's as true for the Irish immigrants as it is for a lot of the people of the Caribbean. For me, some of the richest music comes from the poorest people. I was in Haiti once. That's a country in the Caribbean. It's one of the most impoverished countries in the world. One night, I went to a religious ceremony where I heard some of the most exciting drumming that I'd ever heard. Later, I asked a man whose name was Alphonse, who worked at the hotel where I was staying, if he could get me a drum like one of the ones I'd seen. He told me that he could. And a few days later, he told me to come to his home. When I arrived there, I found this beautiful drum. He had made it himself. He'd carved it, and his son, Joseph, had painted it with shoe polish, orange and black. He explained that the drum was an African drum, because this is what the people had brought with them when they had been brought to Haiti as slaves. He told me to practice so that he could hear me play it later that night when he came to work. I put it over my shoulder and I walked back to the hotel. And on the way, I passed a group of children who were playing in the street. They started following me, laughing and calling out to more of their friends. I guess they found it funny seeing this tourist carrying a Haitian drum on his shoulder. So I stopped, put down the drum, and began to play it. They seemed a little surprised at first that I could play it at all. But after a while, they were dancing and they even started singing. They invited me to go back to their school with them, which I did, and they ended up inviting me into their class, and I played with them. While I was there, I was able to make this recording of them. That night it was hot. I couldn't sleep because I really wanted to play my new drum. So I picked it up and left the hotel, left all the lights and noise of the tourist area behind me, and I went out alone into the night. I walked and walked until I came to a quiet spot in a kind of courtyard that was overgrown with trees and bushes. The only light came filtering through the trees from the half moon of a cloudless sky. I was just settling in when I heard a branch break and I saw a face watching me from the bushes. I tried to just keep playing. Then I saw the bushes move, and slowly, very slowly, two large men came out of the darkness towards me. I kept playing. I could make out that one of the men was carrying something that glinted when the light of the moon caught it, and the other man had something in his hand about the size of a baseball bat. They came over, one on either side of me. Then slowly, very slowly, they sat down. I didn't know what to do. I looked to one side and smiled at the man. And then I looked at the other man and smiled at him. That was one of the men. And that was the other one. This man was playing a broken piece of drain pipe. The other man was hitting on a bottle. And they were smiling. They had come to play. Before long, more people started to come into the clearing. Someone else brought a drum. And another man came who was playing a bass box. And some other people who brought shakers with them. And there was Alphonse with his son. All kinds of people came, some to listen, some to dance, and others to sing. Then I saw something I'd never seen before. A man laid a flat piece of wood on the ground, started to play 2 pieces of bamboo, and everybody gathered around him and started to sing in a circle. I later learned that throughout the Caribbean, especially in Trinidad, there were whole orchestras that were made up of from 40 to 50 people who all played pieces of bamboo like this. They were called Tambu Bands. About 50 years ago, they were outlawed. The people of the Caribbean had taken to the streets, protesting oppression and poverty, and the Tambu Bands often led to demonstrations. And well, one thing usually led to another. People got hurt. The authorities outlawed them and arrested people who were found carrying them. So the people were forced to find other things to keep their rhythms alive. And they did. All kinds of things. Bottles, wheel rims, garbage cans, oil cans that soon became steel drums. And with that, Calypso music began. Beautiful music that centered on songs of social protest. But at the same time, they had their radios tuned to stations that were broadcasting from America, and they heard what everyone else was listening to and loving, good old rock and roll. And they took the electric bass and rhythm guitar and electric pianos and synthesizers, and they put it all together with their own traditional music and rhythms, and they called it soca. And once a year, just before Lent, they have a week-long celebration. It's called Carnival.
Shake your waist. I'd rock you to rock in the carnival. I'd rock you to rock in the carnival. I'd rock you to rock in the
When Mr. Bo Diddley was growing up in the streets of Chicago, he didn't realize that he had something in common with a young boy named Abraham Adzinya, who was growing up in Ghana, a country in West Africa. What the two young boys had in common was a beat that has become known here in North America as the Bo Diddley beat. Abraham studied drumming for many years, and his teachers were showing him the rhythms that had been handed down through time by his ancestors. One of the rhythms that he learned as a young boy was this one. The day that Bo Diddley came across that beat on his guitar, he probably had no idea that somehow he had come across a beat that was 1,000 years old, played by his ancestors back in Africa. Somehow he had picked it out of the air. Somehow he had been tuned into the airwaves. When Abraham Adzinya became a man, he became a great drummer, a master drummer, and he started to teach others. He taught me. And one of the most important things that he taught me is the importance of listening. Like all forms of communication, music is a dialogue, and dialogue is based on speaking and listening, broadcasting and receiving, giving and taking. It is only when we really listen to the signals that others are sending out that we will be able to best know how to respond.